Hey guys, I'm doing another review here, and I actually got the idea for this review from a YouTuber called KevG1962. I was in the market for actually both of these watches, and he has a great review of the 103 Sinn here, and he also on the table had a Speedmaster, and um, I was actually in the market for both of these watches at the time when I saw that video, but I was watching all of the videos that I could find on both of the watches, and he has my favorite review of the 103. And he mentions that he said that some of his friends reckon that these are pretty similar watches, so it kind of gave me the idea to kind of compare them because they are a little bit similar in a lot of ways. They're steel, black face chronographs. Um, they both have their followings. Obviously, the Speedmaster is, I'd say, more popular, but it's an interesting idea because they are kind of, you'd call them tool watches, um, but they are kind of very different too. Like, they're almost opposites in a lot of ways, um, even though they're on the surface very similar. So I thought it was kind of a cool starting point for a video. So let's go over how they're similar. So they're both steel. They're both, you'd call tool watches. Now that's a kind of a weird term that you have to kind of figure out for yourself, but I consider them both tool watches because this was made, they described it for like professional people back in the day before they had a lot of electronic equipment, timing equipment. People that would do certain jobs now, like racing drivers is one example, but even in engineering fields and scientific fields where you use a stopwatch, I think these were marketed for people like that originally. So it's kind of like a general purpose tool watch for timing things. This is more specifically a pilot watch. So it's like it's I think basically meant to look like the gauge of a airplane, like a cockpit instrument almost. This isn't the most pilot chronograph that they have because it has this other timing bezel, which is a bit more like a dive bezel, and it's also a lot more water resistant at 200 meters. This is 50 meters. And I'm kind of surprised that Omega doesn't kind of ramp that up because 50 meters, everybody that talks about these is always scared to get them wet, even though 50 meters should be pretty waterproof. And like I said in another video, the original Speedmasters were part of the Seamaster family, and that's why they had the Sea Monster hippocampus logo on the case backs. They still do to this day, the basic models. This is actually a bit different from the basic because it has sapphire top and bottom, so you see the movement, which it's like my favorite feature of this watch. That's what I don't really care that much about whether it's got a sapphire or hesselite or acrylic crystal. This is the basic one that has the acrylic crystal, and I like that because this is actually my only acrylic watch. It's my first experience with with a kind of a higher end watch that has acrylic. So it's kind of that would have been the classic chronographs, and classic watches would have had acrylic. So some people, and I was watching a lot of these videos to try to figure out whether this ring that you get, they call it a milky ring, that you don't really get with an acrylic crystal. The way this crystal is made, it's like rounded off and it sits proud almost to look like the old acrylic crystals, because I think if they had put a flat sapphire, I don't know even if it would fit with the hands, but it would give a very different look if the crystal were flush to the bezel. So they kind of made it look like the old acrylic, and it does have this milky ring that I never think about. But when I look at it, when I wear it, I don't say, oh, there's a milky ring. But when you buy it, you kind of have to think about it like, oh, am I gonna not like that milky ring, that cloudy circle, which is you looking through the curved sapphire, because the acrylic you see right through. And a lot of people who like vintage watches, there are a few different characteristics. Obviously, it scratches more easily, but it's also repaired more easily and replaced way more cheaply. It has a different feel to it. They say it has a warm look to it. You can see this kind of, it looks like, gives it a bit of warmth, and it actually warm to the touch, because obviously it's like not nearly like it's an insulator, much better insulator than the sapphire. So when you touch, it's kind of like touching metal. It's seen as cold, even though it's the same temperature. When you touch the acrylic, it feels like body temperature or a bit lower. And obviously it does that what do you call that when it kind of bends the numbers? So it has that look from an angle, kind of distorts the numerals. So they're basically sports watches. They're both steel. These are both not the complete basic model because of their respective watches, because this is the matte finish, which I like. I don't really like fully polished cases. I don't know of any watches that I like that are fully polished. I'm more of a casual watch wearer, so I prefer the brushed. In this case, it's like a bead blasted. I think it's like a sand blasted, and it's a kind of, I can't get it on this camera, but it's so finely blasted that it almost gives like a rainbow effect in person, almost like a CD or something, when it's, because just I guess the grain is so fine that it like breaks up the light. So it's kind of a cool feature. So for similarities, I mean, the black dials, very legible, white numerals here on their numerals on their Arabic numerals on the subdials. This has Arabic numerals all over the place, and of course on the tack bezel too. But this is much more of a sterile look. They're both very legible. I'd say it's easier to read. I mean, this is a great watch for like probably not learning to tell the time, but anybody, if you were learning to tell the time, this is really easy because you're only ever 1 hour, even though it doesn't have the 12, 3, 6, 9 numerals for the hours. You're only one away ever, so you don't have to think about it. You just glance and you know what time it is instantly. Also, because of the elapsed time bezel gives you the minutes too, so you have the hours and the minutes all in Arabic. It's like the fastest read you could get, almost, apart from something that's not a chronograph. So I guess that's most of the similarity. So if you did see them at the glance, they're stainless steel, black and white sports watches, tool watches, rugged. And so in that case, and they're fairly similar sized. They call this a 41 millimeter case. It's actually a 41 millimeter bezel. It's exactly 41 millimeters. And then the case, so if the round of the case on this kind of chunky flank to this is exactly 40 millimeters. So if you measure the round of the case according to this mid case, it's exactly 40, and the bezel is exactly 41. So that's kind of good to know. I'm always like really interested in the sizing, because I didn't have either of these and I didn't know how they would wear. And this they call 42 millimeter. I've said this before, but it's really like a 39.7 if you measure the bezel, and it's really how it wears. The 42 they get because they include this crown guard. So like I said in another video, most watches don't give you the stat with the crown guard, though it's not technically a crown guard that protrudes like on its own, but it is the case itself that goes out to make a crown guard. But so it really wears like a 40, and this I'd say it wears like a 41. So they're fairly similar sized. Now let's get to the differences. There's a lot of differences. Like I said, this is 200 meter water resistant, the Sinn, and that, so you don't really worry about it. Other than pushing, like you wouldn't want to push the pushers underwater. That would be a big problem, I think. You wouldn't want to try it anyway. But apart from that, it's like, these guys make serious dive watches in pretty much the same case. So they'd have all the gaskets and everything up to that standard. So I believe this when they say it's 200 meters water resistant. You probably don't want to mess around with going in the water too much, though you can. I know there's a guy on Instagram who had a whole account of just him diving into the water with his, Speedmaster. It's supposed to be waterproof. You should be able to swim with it. It's kind of like, why would you though, right? So you're definitely not going to want to be diving, and why would you? It's not a screw down crown. That's probably the biggest difference. And I like that. I like that this is not a screw down crown because it's a manual wind. There are some manual winds I've seen, watches that are manual wind and have screw down crowns. That would be a pain, and I wouldn't want to do it because you're just killing your gasket every time you unscrew it and screw it in. I think maybe I'm wrong. I'm kind of paranoid, but so this is a manual wind. It's not running, so I might as well wind it. And now this is one thing I haven't talked about, but it's a little bit hard to wind on the top. It's actually easier. I actually sometimes wind it from the back because you have more. It's free on the bottom, so my thumb's bigger than the other finger. So I actually wind it like this sometimes because maybe I just have stubby fingers, but it's not the easiest to grab a hold of when you're winding it. But it's very smooth. You can wind it just like this too. But so it's a great winder. But yeah, it is a bit tricky to get your fingers on. You wouldn't want to do it with gloves. But the good part is, it won't have a big crown to go into the back of your hand. I'll do a wrist shot of both later. But so it's a smaller crown, whereas this, I actually stopped wearing. There were certain watches like Rolexes with big crowns that I just started wearing my watches on my right hand because they just dig in. They're just such huge crowns. But it makes sense because you could do this if you were, like, let's say a pilot or going swimming or diving. You probably wouldn't be diving, but if you had gloves on, let's say you were outside, you could way more easily change the time on this than on the Speedmaster because of the size of the crown. This isn't running either. Actually, I didn't start it before because I thought it was so cool. It stopped exactly at 60 seconds, which is interesting. But I do wind it if it stops. But so more things that are different. So this is obviously an automatic movement, which is a huge difference from a manual wind. It also has the day and the date, which is really handy. I end up wearing this more just because I love having the day and date. I'm a teacher, so I like to have the day and date at a glance. It's a big help. And then the bezels are different. This is a fixed bezel on the Speedmaster tachometer, right? So it'll tell you how many units per hour anything takes you. So if you start the stopwatch, anything within basically from about 8 seconds to 60 seconds, if any job or anything that you're doing takes between 8 and 60 seconds, you can instantly calculate how many you would do in an hour. So the classic example is the if you're racing a car back in the day, they'd have mile markers, and I don't know how many race cars would not have speedometers, but if you didn't have one, let's say it took you 30 seconds to do a lap, then you're doing 120 units per hour, whether it's kilometer markers or mile markers. So, but I mean, even if you were like making a sandwich and then you timed and it took you 45 seconds to make a sandwich, then you could do 80 sandwiches in an hour. So it's just simply tells you how many units per hour you can do of something that you can time. But again, only from 500 to 60 an hour is the only ones it'll tell you. This is great because you don't even have to use your chronograph most of the time. If you want to time something, it is bi-directional. You just line it up, and then away you go. And so you don't have to go through the wear and tear of using your chronograph. You want to time. I actually time. So I'm a teacher, so I do a lot of things with like time. Let's say like races in the gym or something like that, and you can use the small seconds. And let's say you're gonna start timing something, so it'll come. Okay, you say okay, go, and then it's on the 20, and then whenever it stops, you just look at how many seconds it is, and then you can read off how many it was from where you started. And then you can, it's kind of like a flyback. You can just start again. Okay, go. Then you can do another one. So it's fun for like doing relay races or whatever, and you don't have to like use your chronograph 20 times, you know. So it's easy. It's super easy for timing things. If you can, you know, the countdown timer is like 15 minutes left on the rice. Okay, so when it gets the arrow, you're good to go. You don't have to start the chronograph. So I do end up using the elapsed time bezel more than I do the chronograph. What else can I say? The differences. So the price is a big difference. New or used, I find when I look around, like I paid about twice as much for the Speedmaster, for the Sinn. That they were both new. Well, they were both new, but I got this gray market because it's more than twice if you pay the authorized dealer, the tax, and all of that. So you can get these gray market with a full kit. You don't get the warranty, but I mean, it's a new Omega. It's not going to break before you need to service it. And if it does, well, it's out of your pocket and it's going to cost less than the markup on it, you know. So that's the route I went. It's not for everybody. If you're a real collector, you'll want the warranty card and all that, but I didn't buy it to resell it or keep it as a collector's item. It's like there's a trillion Speedmasters out there, so I just really bought it to wear it. And the Sinn, you can get it used for probably like 1,500 American. I paid retail because I wanted it in new condition, and most of the people who buy Sinns and sell them, they've like really used them, you know. It's not a fancy watch, even though it's not cheap, but it's like people really buy these to wear them, which is kind of comes back to the tool watch discussion. I mean, that's a term a lot of people use a lot, but I don't know. This is really a tool watch, I'd say, because it's not that expensive, and it has a lot of functions. Day, date, super waterproof. You got the chronograph, and it's just got that tool look too. The squared and beveled lugs, not quite squared, but angular. Another difference is how they wear. They are not that different in actual thickness. This is about 14.5 millimeters, and this is about 14 millimeters thick. But just because of the automatic chronograph movement, it's a thicker, chunkier watch. But Sinn does a really good job. They give you this kind of, I don't know what you call that, like it's like a quarter round taken away, but it gives you that mid case that almost looks like it's slimmer than it actually is. It kind of is an illusion, because the mid case, it's not the case back. They have another line. A lot of watches just have like a flat flank side that goes all the way to the case back, but they've really taken the time to add in another detail that makes it look slimmer, which I really appreciate, because a lot of watches with this movement, which I'll talk about the movements in a second a bit more, but they look way bigger than this. This is about as thin as you can make a 7750 look. So I do appreciate that. Plus the lugs are angled down, so it doesn't sit up on the case back as much. It kind of hugs your wrist a bit better. So this is a good job, even though it is a chunkier watch. This is naturally going to be a slimmer watch, even though it has a bigger case back because of the sapphire, and it has this kind of tall bezel and the box crystal. So that's what gives it the similar thickness to that, but this does wear more slimly. I've talked about this in the where I compare the Speedmaster to the Rolex. It's this mid case, even though it's flat and it doesn't hug your wrist as much. It just gives you this illusion. Also, they both kind of give you a bit of an illusion, but it's the slim middle case, and it's because there's no rotor, so they can make it a little bit slimmer. So it's a manual wind with no automatic rotor. So, and it also gives you a way better view of the movement, which is kind of, because it's a bit of a fancier watch, it's fun, and it's a classic chronograph movement. This is more of a modern chronograph movement. This is like a classic chronograph movement, except it doesn't have the, of course, the column wheel. It has a cam actuated chronograph, but it has the lateral clutch. They're both lateral clutch. They're both cam operated and lateral clutch, but this has the just that classic layout. If you open an old chronograph, it'll look like this. If you look at this, it'll look like a modern, more industrial movement. Sinn uses top grade ETA 7750, so it's not any worse. Like it's not a worse movement, but it is more utilitarian. It's more of a workhorse. This is more of a classic design, and it kind of feels like the winding on this is very rough. If you've never wound a 7750, I'm not going to say it feels like there's sand in it, but it's just kind of rough, and it kind of does a weird click when it's fully wound. When it's fully wound and then you go into screwing it in, it kind of feels like there's a spring that pops and catches. It's a bit weird, but it's not going to break. It's a good movement. They could both be regulated to keep chronometer time. This is a top grade movement, but it's not regulated that I know of, or it's definitely not to COSC specs. So it's not a chronometer grade, but it is the top grade, so it has all the same hardware. It's anti-magnetic, shock proof, and it has the better alloys and all that it's the same movement as a chronometer grade ETA. It's just not regulated. It doesn't pass the certification. And this, you could regulate this to chronometer spec 2. It's not as good as, the modern Omega Master chronometer movements that are amagnetic, and, with they have column wheels and vertical clutches and all the higher end that you'd expect on a modern one. But this is the classic movement. Of course, probably a lot of you have heard they're bringing back the 321, which is the lateral clutch column wheel, which is in the original ones. These are cheaper to produce, and they work. So the one drawback is that with a lateral clutch, what happens is this is the small seconds that always runs. Try to zoom it so that you can see it's running, and there's this like intermediate wheel that's coupled up to it, so it's moving too, and then this little arm just gets pushed and comes into contact with, you can't even see them, they're smaller teeth, so they kind of jams them together, so it's a little bit more wear and tear. But the intermediate wheel gets pushed so that this wheel is now running the center seconds. So I'll do that now. Let's see if we can perceive a little kick when it starts. See, so it jumped to about half a second when I started it. So it's just the way it is. This is also a lower beat movement. I believe it's like 21,000. What is it? 21,600. I think that's 6 beats per second. I could be wrong on those numbers, but I think that's what it is. And then this is definitely the high beat movement. This also has a lateral clutch, so let's see if this kicks too. That was smoother. I don't know if it always is. If it operates better, I don't think so. They both can kind of jump. That might have just meshed, just happened to mesh. But if the teeth kind of, if the wheels come together like this instead of like this, you're gonna get a little jump, Whereas a lateral clutch would just, a vertical clutch is just like stepping, it's just like two plates that touch each other, and it doesn't matter where they are, they just automatically start. And because they're cam actuated, they're not quite as nice feeling when you start them. They just kind of click a little harder, whereas a column wheel just has a nicer engagement on most of them. I've had Omega column wheels before, and it is kind of a satisfying feeling more than these, but I would say this has a bit of a nicer feel than this. Like I say, this is just, things about it are just a little bit more industrial or workhorsey, if you'll allow me to say that. So yeah, the price is different, the finish is different. This is very modern and German looking, which it is, and this is kind of your classic artistic big bevels here, and more polish, which normally I'm not a big fan of polish, but it kind of just gives it that in person. This is embarrassing, I know this is not the best video, but I try to get a lot of info in, because when I watch videos, it's not like for production quality so much, it's just for the info. So it's kind of to help me make my mind up. But this is nicer in person. Like it is pretty fancy just because of that polish, which is not always a good thing. Plus, it'll pick up marks more easily than this. But I baby my watches. I'm unashamed to say I try to keep them as new as I can, because I don't really want patinaed old looking watches. I like, it's like, it's a pretty fancy watch, and I try to keep it new, even though it's a tool watch. I'm not smashing this around, and it's the new school. I think the people who originally bought these, they just thought it was a tool, and it's like like a hammer. You just wear it, you use it until it's worn out. But I try to keep these nice, because I can't buy another one, and I don't want to be buying new ones all the time, so I try to keep them looking good. That's just me. So yeah, date on this, no date on this. This is manual wind, this is automatic, so this just has a lot more features. I'd say this is more like a classic, sterile, and a bit fancier. This is modern, very utilitarian, and a little bit more severe. Also with the sandblasted, it's definitely more, I won't say workhorse again, well I just did, but it's just kind of it is what it is. Super legible, useful. I wear it all the time because it's got the date, it's automatic, and you don't worry about it. And this is a bit more maybe a special occasion, or Speedy Tuesday, or bring it out for Instagram. So let's oh, that's embarrassing to say that, but it's the truth. No, not really. I like to wear them, that's why I buy them. Wrist shot, it's harder with the camera. I have about a 7 3/4 inch wrist. Let's it on the wrist, try to get the flecto away. Let's go. This is a long video. Hopefully you're in for that. This is the Sinn. So I've seen a lot of these pick up scratches easily. The whatever this finish is on, I think they say it's aluminum, but I don't know what type of paint they use, but I haven't got too many. There's a little ding here, but it's not too bad, it holds up. But I do see a lot of these, you'll see them scratched up easily. Whenever you see a used one for sale, it's usually scratched. So anyway, that's my take on these two watches. So hopefully you enjoyed that.